sound of gold scraping against bone. Year 20,784 CE. You're standing in a Roman street, your back pressed flat against a cold stone wall. There are thousands of people around you, bodies packed so tight you can't lift your arms. You can barely pull in a full breath. Your only job today is to watch. At the center of the procession, a woman stumbles forward. Her wrists are raw, split open, not from rope, from gold. 40 pounds of solid gold chains coil around her arms, her neck, her ankles. They're so heavy that 2 Roman guards walk beside her, gripping the chains and lifting them slightly, so she doesn't collapse face first onto the cobblestones. 3 months ago, that gold was hers. It paid her armies. It built her temples. It financed her empire. It made her the most powerful woman between Egypt and Turkey. Now it's crushing her. Zenobia of Palmyra, the Queen of the East, the woman who humiliated 3 Roman emperors, the ruler of 70,000 soldiers. Now she shuffles through Rome like a trophy. The crowd roars, rotten fruit bursts against her chest. Something wet hits her cheek. Spit. She can't wipe it away. Her hands are pinned by the very wealth that once crowned her. A child points and laughs. His mother lifts him higher so he can see better. But from where you're standing, you can't see what's happening inside her mind. With every step, the same thought repeats. A prayer she's whispered since dawn. Not save me, not give me strength. Just 3 words. Let it be the villa. Because she knows there are 2 doors waiting at the end of this road. One leads to a comfortable prison, a Roman villa where she will live out her days as a living reminder of Rome's power. The other leads underground, to a dark cell carved into the Capitoline Hill. A place called the Tullianum, a place where Rome ends its enemies quietly, permanently. 4 kilometers of not knowing which door carries your name. 4 kilometers of smiling Romans deciding whether you live or die. 4 kilometers of praying to gods who have never answered. This is what Rome did to captured queens. Not just Zenobia, not just once. For over 700 years, this was a system, perfected, refined, designed to break the most powerful women in the ancient world. And Zenobia? She was one of the lucky ones. Others suffered fates that made execution look like mercy. But before you understand what happened to the queens who weren't lucky, you need to understand what a Roman triumph really was. Forget the polished scenes from movies. The real thing was worse. When a Roman general won a major war, the Senate could grant him a triumph, the highest honor in Roman society. It was a parade, a massive celebration winding through the heart of the city. But it wasn't just a parade. It was psychological warfare disguised as a party. The procession began at the Field of Mars, just outside the city walls. It stretched nearly 4 kilometers, weaving through Rome's streets before ending at the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. The entire city shut down. Over 1 million people lined the route. Shops closed, courts adjourned. Even slaves were given the day off, so they could watch other slaves being dragged past in chains. Now imagine you're a captured queen, waiting to be brought forward. First, you hear it. Trumpets, drums, the sound echoing off stone buildings. The music bounces through the streets for almost an hour before you see anything. Then the carts appear. Wagon after wagon stacked high with treasure stolen from your kingdom. Gold coins your ancestors minted. Silver plates your grandmother ate from. Sacred objects taken from temples your people built over centuries. The crowd cheers each cart. They're calculating how much their taxes might drop now that Rome has your wealth. Then come the paintings. Huge wooden panels carried by slaves. They show your cities burning, your soldiers dying, your palace being looted. Roman artists traveled with the legions for this exact reason, to capture your defeat in vivid detail. The crowd points, they laugh, they recognize your city, they cheer when they see it in flames. Then come the animals, lions in cages, elephants in chains, strange birds trapped in gilded bars. Proof that Rome has conquered not just your army, but your land itself. And then, silence. The drums slow, because now come the prisoners. Common soldiers first, hundreds of them chained together, shuffling forward, heads lowered. They know where they're going. The slave markets. Their lives as free men are over. The crowd barely looks at them. They're waiting for someone else. They're waiting for you. The captured rulers walk at the front, still dressed in royal garments, still wearing crowns and jewelry. That's intentional. A beaten peasant means nothing, but a queen, still wrapped in silk and gold, still recognizable as the woman who defied Rome, now wounded, chained, exhausted. That sends a message. No crown protects you. No army saves you. No throne is beyond our reach. And here's what the movies never show you: the uncertainty. Some captured rulers survived the triumph. They were exiled, given comfortable imprisonment, sometimes even absorbed into Roman society. Others were executed the moment the parade ended, taken underground to the Tullianum, while the celebration continued above them, never seen again. You didn't know which fate awaited you until the final steps of that 4-kilometer walk. That uncertainty was part of the torture. For queens, the calculation was even more complex. A dead queen becomes a martyr for a moment, then a memory. But a living queen? Broken, visible, dependent on Rome for survival? That's a long-term warning, unless she's too dangerous to keep alive. The decision rested with the emperor, and you wouldn't know his choice until a guard either handed you keys or carried out a sentence. In 60 CE, on a cold island at the edge of the known world, a queen discovered exactly how little her crown meant to Rome. Her name was Boudica, and her story is one of the most brutal in Roman history. Boudica was queen of the Iceni, a Celtic tribe in what is now eastern England. Her husband, King Prasutagus, had spent his entire reign trying to stay on Rome's good side. He paid their taxes, followed their laws. He cooperated. And when he felt death approaching, he made what he believed was a smart, diplomatic move. In his will, he left half his kingdom to Emperor Nero. The other half, he left to his 2 daughters. It was a compromise, a gesture of loyalty, a desperate attempt to protect his family. Rome ignored it. Within days of his death, imperial officials arrived with soldiers. They announced that the entire kingdom now belonged to Rome. The will meant nothing. The alliance meant nothing. Decades of loyalty meant nothing. They began seizing everything. Iceni nobles were dragged from their homes in the middle of the night. Estates that had belonged to families for generations were confiscated before sunrise. Relatives of the dead king were chained and marched into bondage while their children watched. Boudica protested. She was the queen. Her husband had been a Roman ally. There were treaties. There were laws. She demanded to speak with the Roman procurator, a man named Catius Decianus. He agreed. What happened next was recorded by the Roman historian Tacitus, whose own father-in-law served in Britain during this time. Tacitus doesn't soften what happened. He doesn't excuse it. Even as a Roman, he describes it with horror. Boudica was seized by soldiers in front of her own people. They humiliated her publicly in the town square. The queen who had ruled beside her husband for decades was dragged like a criminal before her subjects. They tied her to a post, and they flogged her. A Roman flogging was not a simple beating. They used a flagrum, a whip with multiple leather thongs, each embedded with metal balls and fragments of bone. Every strike tore flesh. Each blow opened wounds that scarred for life. Many victims died from flogging alone. Boudica survived, but that wasn't the worst part. Her daughters were brought forward. Tacitus doesn't give their ages. He doesn't record their names. He only says they were unmarried. The soldiers grabbed them, dragged them away toward the barracks, and Boudica, still tied to the post, blood running down her back, understood exactly what that meant. She screamed, not words, just sound. The raw, animal scream of a mother watching her children being taken. She pulled against the ropes until her wrists bled. She begged in her own language, a language the Romans didn't understand and wouldn't have cared about if they did. The soldiers laughed. Tacitus writes that the girls were handed over to the soldiers. He doesn't describe more. He didn't need to. Every Roman reading those words knew what they meant. This was not done in secret, not in a dark room. It was deliberate, public, a message. Your queen is nothing. Your princesses are nothing. Your tribe is nothing. Caius Decianus expected the Iceni to submit after that, to be too broken, too afraid. He was catastrophically wrong. Within weeks, Boudica raised an army, not just the Iceni. Word spread across Britain like wildfire. Tribes who had tolerated Roman rule for decades suddenly saw their own daughters in those unnamed princesses, their own wives in that flogged queen. They came by the thousands, then the tens of thousands. Boudica led them first to Camulodunum, the Roman capital of Britain. The city had no walls. Its Roman veterans had grown soft. They believed the conquered would never dare rise up. They were wrong. The Iceni burned it to the ground. No one was spared. Roman officials, settlers, families. This wasn't conquest. This was revenge. Next came Londinium, the largest trading city in Britain. The Romans attempted to evacuate, but thousands were left behind. Boudica's army showed no mercy. Archaeologists have found a thick layer of burned debris beneath modern London, a red scar in the earth marking how completely the city was destroyed. Tacitus claims 70,000 Romans and Roman allies died in the rebellion. Other sources say more, and through it all, Boudica rode at the front in a chariot. Her daughters beside her, the same daughters who had been dragged through the square, now watching Roman cities burn. Before the final battle, Tacitus says she addressed her army. She told them she did not fight as a queen defending a kingdom. She fought as a mother, avenging what had been done to her children. The final confrontation took place at a location lost to history. Roman discipline and tactical positioning defeated Boudica's larger, disorganized force. The rebellion was crushed. Boudica chose poison over capture. She knew what Rome did to captured queens. She had already tasted it. Her daughters vanished from the record after the rebellion began. No names, no graves, no confirmed fate. Maybe they died in battle. Maybe they took poison beside their mother. Maybe they were captured and suffered the very fate Boudica had risen to avenge. We will never know. Rome made sure of that. 40 years before Boudica painted Britain red, another queen learned that sometimes survival is its own kind of torture. Her name was Thusnelda, and her story might be even crueler. Not because of what was done to her body, but because of what was done to her bloodline. Thus Nelda was the wife of Arminius, the Germanic chieftain who handed Rome one of its greatest military humiliations. In 9 CE, Arminius ambushed 3 Roman legions in the Teutoburg forest. 15,000 soldiers marched into that forest. Almost none marched out. For 3 days in rain and mud, Roman soldiers were slaughtered. The legionary eagles, sacred symbols of Rome, were captured. The Roman commander Varus took his own life rather than be taken. When news reached Emperor Augustus, the most powerful man in the world, he reportedly wandered his palace in despair, striking his head against the walls and crying into the night, "Varus, give me back my legions." Rome never forgot, and Rome never forgave. When they couldn't capture Arminius, they targeted those he loved. Thus Nelda was betrayed by her own father. His name was Segestes, a Germanic noble who had always opposed her marriage to Arminius. He favored cooperation with Rome. When Roman forces returned seeking revenge, Segestes saw opportunity. He kidnapped his own daughter. She was pregnant at the time, carrying Arminius's child, and he handed her over to Rome. His daughter, his unborn grandchild, traded for favor, for safety, for status under the empire that sought to crush his people. The Romans were delighted. They didn't have Arminius, but they had his wife and his heir. They kept the Snelda alive, imprisoned, but alive. She gave birth in captivity, a son named Thumelicus, the heir to Arminius, the grandson of Rome's greatest humiliation. They waited until 17 CE, when the Roman general Germanicus claimed enough victories in Germania to earn a triumph. And that is when they brought Thusnelda to Rome, in chains, with her young son. Picture it. A Germanic queen walking through Rome in chains, the proud wife of the man who made Augustus weep, and in her arms, her small son, the living bloodline of Rome's most humiliating defeat. The streets are packed. Many in the crowd lost fathers, brothers, sons in the Teutoburg forest. They don't just boo, they howl, they scream for blood. Some shout for the child to be killed right there in the street. Mothers lift their children and point. That's the spawn of the monster who killed your uncle, your grandfather, your father. A stone flies from somewhere in the crowd. It strikes the Snelda's shoulder, then another and another. Roman soldiers form a barrier around her, not out of mercy, but to make sure she survives long enough to finish the procession. The triumph must be completed. The humiliation must be seen. The Greek geographer Strabo described her during that march. He expected tears, begging, collapse. Instead, she walked with her eyes fixed forward. Her face gave them nothing. No fear, no pleading, no satisfaction. But inside, she was making a promise. Not to the Roman gods, not to the husband still fighting somewhere in the forests of Germania, to the infant pressed against her chest. She whispered in her own tongue, words no Roman could understand. They will not break you, whatever they do, wherever they take you. You are the son of Arminius, you carry his blood. And one day, she never finished the sentence. Because even as she whispered it, she knew she could not guarantee it. She walked those 4 kilometers through hatred thick as smoke, but her defiance could not protect him. Thumelicus was raised not as a prince, not as a leader, not as the heir to a warrior who shattered 3 legions. He was raised as a slave, and eventually trained as a gladiator. Think about that. Romans packed arenas to watch men kill each other for sport. They reclined in shaded seats, eating figs, drinking wine. They cheered when steel met flesh. and somewhere on that sand stood the son of Arminius, the grandson of Rome's humiliation, the heir to a Germanic rebellion that once shook the empire. Every wound he took was revenge for Teutoburg. Every blow he delivered proved something else, that Rome had broken the bloodline. Most in the crowd had no idea who he was. To them, he was just another barbarian swinging a sword, anonymous, disposable. That was the point. The prince of the Cherushi reduced to entertainment, his royal blood meaningless, his father's legacy erased with every fight. Did he know who he was? Did anyone ever tell him that his father once made an emperor scream into the night? That his mother had walked in chains through Rome and refused to bow? Or did he grow up believing he was nothing? Just another slave. Just another body for the arena. The sources tell us he died in Ravenna, lost in combat. No record of his final opponent. No record of his last words. Just another fallen gladiator dragged off the sand while the crowd waited for the next spectacle. And that was exactly what Rome wanted. Thus Nelda herself disappears from history after the triumph. No clear record of her death, no monument, no grave. She likely spent her remaining years as a household slave somewhere in Italy, serving food, scrubbing floors, taking orders from people who, years earlier, would not have been worthy to carry her sandals. Did she ever learn what happened to her son? Did whispers reach her through other slaves? Did she die hoping he was still alive somewhere? Or did she die knowing that the promise she whispered during that march, "They will not break you," had been broken long before he could remember her face? That was Roman mercy, not swift execution, not public torture, but slow erasure. Now go back to Zenobia, 4 kilometers in golden chains. She knew these stories. Every ruler in the ancient world knew them. Boudica, the queen flogged, her daughters violated, her rebellion drowned in blood. Thus Nelda, the queen paraded, her son raised as a gladiator, her bloodline ground into dust. When Zenobia felt the gold biting into her skin, she wasn't just feeling pain, she was calculating. Would Emperor Aurelian execute her? Would he humiliate her like Boudica? Would he keep her alive only to watch her children absorbed into Rome? 1 million Romans screaming for her death. 4 kilometers of that question. And at the end, she received the door that did not lead underground. Aurelian made his own calculation. Zenobia was too famous to kill. For 5 years, she had ruled a vast Eastern empire. She minted coins bearing her own face, declared herself Queen of Egypt, styled herself as a new Cleopatra. If he executed her, she would become a martyr, a symbol, a name whispered by future rebels. But if he kept her alive, visible, dependent, tamed, that told a stronger story. Look at Zenobia, she challenged us. Now she lives because we allow it. Aurelian gave her a villa in Tibur, about 30 kilometers from Rome. Comfortable, elegant, a gilded cage. The Historia Augusta claims she later married a Roman senator. The warrior queen who once commanded armies became a Roman matron. She attended dinner parties where guests whispered about her past, walked through markets where strangers stared, raised daughters who would never see Palmyra as she knew it. They learned Latin instead of Aramaic, worshipped Roman gods, married into Roman families. Within 3 generations, the bloodline of the Queen of the East was fully absorbed. No one looking at her descendants would know they carried the blood of a woman who once rivaled emperors. That was Rome's genius. They didn't just conquer enemies. They erased them, absorbed them, turned conquered blood into Roman citizens who celebrated the empire that destroyed their ancestors. Boudica chose death. Her rebellion killed tens of thousands. but it failed. Her daughters vanished. Thusnelda survived, but she watched her son die in the arena. Zenobia lived in comfort, but every morning she woke knowing she existed at Rome's pleasure. Every meal, every silk garment, every conversation, a gift from the empire that crushed her. Is that mercy? Or is that the most refined form of torture? The Mamertine prison still stands in Rome today. Tourists walk through it, take photos, smile. The streets where Zenobia shuffled in gold chains are now lined with cafes. People sip espresso in the same forum where crowds once screamed for queens to be destroyed. History has been polished, sanitized, suffering turned into scenery, just as Rome intended. Zenobia survived, but servants later claimed she woke from nightmares, that sometimes, mid-conversation, her eyes drifted away, lost in memories she never voiced, that she prayed alone, in a language Rome could never erase. She never returned to Palmyra, never sat on her throne again. When she died, she was buried in Roman soil, under a Roman name, almost erased, but not completely. Boudica's story survived. Thusnelda's story survived. Rome wanted them forgotten. 2,000 years later, we still speak their names. They were meant to be silenced, but silence is not erasure, and forgotten is not gone. If this story reached you, subscribe, because history isn't dead. It's waiting in the dark, for someone to remember.